Perfect. So hi again, everyone. My name is Caitlin. I work in the international office at Fanshawe College. And today we're going to be talking about arriving in Canada, everything you need to know to plan your arrival, if you have to quarantine or not, your vaccination, what's going to be required for that. A lot of really good information. Before we get into the presentation, I will ask everyone to please keep yourselves on mute during the presentation, just so we don't have any interruptions. You can chat, use the chat, ask any questions you want into the chat, but please don't share too much personal information like your phone number or your email address, because this is being recorded and anything you type into the chat is included in the recording, so you don't want that information out on the internet. But any questions, please ask them in the chat. One of my colleagues will be joining to help answer questions, and we will have time for questions at the end of the presentation. So I'll go back and read through the chat questions. So a lot to talk about today. There's a lot of information. As I said, this session is being recorded. So if you miss something, or if I'm talking too fast, or you just want to hear it again, you will be able to watch this recording very shortly. And I'm just, oops, there we go. That's what I'm looking for. So you will be able to watch this recording online again. We'll share a copy of the presentation, a PDF copy in the chat at the end, so you can take that home with you. So don't worry, if you miss something or if something's not clear, there will be lots of opportunities to get the information again. So you don't need to panic and write everything down. But yeah, a lot of information. So we'll talk about planning your arrival, what you need to do before you come to Canada, and in this first stage, what you can expect when arriving in Canada, all the different forms you're going to need, what it's going to happen at the airport, and then what happens after you arrive. If you have to quarantine, or if you're not quarantining, what you can expect in your first week or two in Canada. So let's get right into it. We'll start with planning your arrival and planning your quarantine. So the good news is that throughout the pandemic, a lot of things have changed, but what hasn't changed is Fanshawe is an approved DLI, Designated Learning Institute. So basically, Fanshawe College is approved to welcome international students to Canada throughout the pandemic. So as long as you're a student with a study permit coming to Fanshawe, you are able to enter Canada. There might be restrictions on how early you can enter Canada. We'll talk about that. But the good news and the summary is, as international students starting at Fanshawe, you can come to Canada now, which is really great. Now, this is a slide we're going to spend a few minutes on because it's an important slide. Some people on this call might be current students. Maybe you're studying right now in the fall semester online from home. Other students might be brand new, starting your studies in January. So you haven't begun studying yet, but you're going to start in January. Some students might have a vaccine recognized in Canada. Some students might have a different vaccine that's not recognized in Canada, and maybe you don't have any vaccines at all yet. And all of those factors, all of those different situations, they're going to determine what you specifically need to do before you come to Canada. So it's different requirements, different timelines, depending on your situation. So for example, if you have a vaccine that's fully recognized in Canada, so one of the 4 vaccines recognized in Canada, and that's Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, or the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, that's great. That's kind of the ideal situation because that means you can arrive anytime up to January 3rd before the start of classes. You don't need to quarantine and you won't have any sort of like booster shots. You don't have to get anything once you're in Canada. You can just come to Canada, show that you have one of those 4 vaccines, and go straight to your permanent accommodation. So it's kind of the easiest situation, the ideal situation. But not everyone's going to have one of those 4 vaccines. We know that. So maybe you're in column 2. So maybe you have a vaccine that's recognized by the World Health Organization or by the CDC, but not yet recognized by Canada. And those are vaccines like Sinovac, Covaxin, Sinopharm, Sputnik, you can see there's a list of them. That middle column, there's quite a few of those vaccines. So if you have one of those vaccines, that's fine. You can still come to Canada. It just changes what you have to do when you arrive. So if you have one of those vaccines that's recognized by WHO, the World Health Organization, but not necessarily recognized in Canada yet, that means when you arrive in Canada, you won't be considered fully vaccinated because you don't have a vaccine that the Canadian government recognizes. And that means you will have to quarantine. So you'll arrive in Canada, you'll do your 2-week quarantine, 14-day quarantine. You'll do the subsequent testing that's required. And then once you finish your quarantine, you're probably going to need to get a booster shot of a vaccine here in Canada to be considered fully vaccinated in Canada so that you can get all the advantages of being fully vaccinated in Canada. So that is something that obviously impacts your planning. You have to plan for a quarantine. You have to plan to get a booster shot, most likely. And that means you're a little more restricted on when you can arrive. So students who have one of these vaccines that's not recognized by Canada, you're going to have to arrive by December 5th because you need that month, more or less, before classes start to do your 2-week quarantine, to get your booster shot, and then to have 14 days before the start of class, between getting your booster shot and the start of class, to fit the vaccination policy. And we will talk about that later on, but just know that's why you have this deadline of December 5th for your arrival. So already a big difference, right? If you have one of the Canadian recognized vaccines versus a non-Canadian recognized vaccine, it impacts whether or not you quarantine, and it impacts your arrival date. Now, some students, depending on where you are in the world, you maybe don't have any vaccine. Maybe you haven't got any shot yet. So that's the third column. So if you haven't received a single dose of a COVID vaccine, that puts you in situation 3. And those students have to arrive even earlier because you have to get your full vaccine series here in Canada before the start of classes. So if you haven't received any vaccine yet, that means you need to arrive by November 7th, complete your 2-week quarantine, and then do both shots of the vaccine here in Canada. And you have to leave so much time in between getting your shots and before the start of classes. And so that's why that earlier deadline is for you. Hopefully not too many students are in that situation because it's a lot more planning on your end. It's a little more tricky. We want most students to be in one of the first 2 columns. So to have some sort of vaccine, and then we can support you through your arrival. So I'm pointing this out because, again, not everything in this presentation is going to apply to every single student on this call. Some of you have to quarantine, some of you don't have to quarantine. It all really depends on your situation. And I'll try to make it distinct as I go through the presentation, but it's good for you to understand kind of these basic details. Okay, I have this vaccine, that means I have to arrive by this date. And do I have to quarantine? Yes or no, right? That's what you have to decide based on which vaccine you've got. You need to understand that. So I'm going to move forward. I hope everyone's had a good look at this chart. And again, I will share a copy at the end of the presentation. So again, some important dates. As a reminder, November 7th, that's the arrival deadline for anyone who doesn't have a single vaccine. You've had no vaccine doses. November 7th is when you have to get here. If you have a vaccine that's maybe not recognized in Canada, but you have like a Sinovac or a Sinopharm or one of the other global vaccines, then you need to be here by December 5th. And January 4th is the orientation day. January 5th is the start of classes. So those are kind of the basic dates that you should know about. Now, new students who are starting their studies in the winter term. So if you're starting your studies for the first time in winter, January 2022, you do have to be careful that you're not arriving too early before the start of classes. So for winter students, we do recommend that you arrive no earlier than January 2nd. And that's for a few reasons. One, your health insurance through Fanshawe begins a month before classes. So it begins on January 2nd. You don't want to be in Canada without health insurance. And two, during the pandemic, the border officers have been a little more hesitant to allow new students early entry to Canada. So they really only want students coming to Canada when they have to be here. And so that's either while you're studying or just before the start of your studies. If you're trying to come 2 months early, 3 months early, they really question what your plans are and what you're going to be doing for that time. So for new winter students, starting your studies in January for the first time, plan to arrive after December 2nd, on or after December 2nd. Now, what does it mean to be fully vaccinated in Canada? This is a really important definition or understanding to have. So in Canada, to be considered fully vaccinated, you have to have the full series of the vaccine. So for most vaccines, it's 2 shots, right? You need to have both shots. You need to have it be one of the vaccines recognized in Canada. So there are 4 vaccines that the government of Canada has recognized: Moderna, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, which is also Covishield, and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So those are the 4 vaccines that the Canadian government has approved. You have to get your final dose of the vaccine at least 14 days before you arrive. So if you get your second shot of the Pfizer vaccine on Monday, and then you fly to Canada on Thursday, that's too soon. The vaccine hasn't taken effect in your body. I can't explain the science, but it hasn't come to full power yet in your body. So you wouldn't be considered fully vaccinated. You'd have to get the shot on Monday the 1st and wait 14 days before you come to Canada for you to be considered fully vaccinated when you arrive. And then, of course, you need to have proof of your vaccination. Unfortunately, we can't just, trust what we say. The border officer wants to see the receipt. They want to see the proof of vaccine. So having some sort of document in English or French, or with a certified translation into English or French, that says your name, the type of vaccine you received, and the date that you received your vaccine. You need to have those 3 crucial pieces of information to show, yep, I've had my Pfizer on October, whatever, I'm now fully vaccinated. So that's how you prove that you're fully vaccinated when you're coming to Canada. When you're fully vaccinated, so when you meet those requirements, you do not need to quarantine when you arrive in Canada. So that's the good news. If you're considered fully vaccinated, meaning you've got your full series, it's one of the 4 recognized in Canada, and you had it at least 14 days before you came, then you don't have to quarantine. You'll still take the COVID test before you come to Canada, which we'll talk about a bit more later. You still need to have a backup plan just in case, something goes wrong at the airport and for whatever reason, the border officer wants you to quarantine. You need that backup plan. That's very rare, just so you know. Most students who arrive fully vaccinated have not had to use their backup plan, but you need to have one just in case. And you'll submit your information before you arrive. So you'll submit your COVID readiness form, you'll submit your ArriveCAN app, and then that's it. For a fully vaccinated student, as long as you've followed all of the steps before arrival, it's a pretty easy experience to come to Canada. You show all of your paperwork, you get your test before you get on the plane, and then you can come and go right to your accommodation. So fully vaccinated students, that's kind of the ideal. That's what you want to be if possible. But what if you're not? What if you're not fully vaccinated by the Canadian definition? Maybe you received a different vaccine or you haven't received any vaccine yet. What happens to you then? Well, in that case, you do have to quarantine on arrival. So if you received a different vaccine, not one of the 4 recognized in Canada, but maybe you received Sinopharm or Sinovac or Sputnik, or there's about a dozen or so other vaccines out there in the world, that means you won't be considered fully vaccinated because Canada doesn't recognize that vaccine. So you will have to quarantine for 14 days. Fanshawe students can quarantine at one of our partner hotels. That's kind of the ideal. Or for this semester, we are allowing quarantine at private accommodations. However, there are some conditions around that we'll talk about. Just because we know the number of students who are arriving and the small kind of time frame that you can arrive, there won't necessarily be enough hotels. So we had to extend that out, which is new this semester, and we'll talk about it more in a second. But what will happen is you'll arrive in Canada, you'll go through immigration, you'll get a test at the airport, and then go immediately from the airport to your quarantine location. Fanshawe provides transportation. You'll quarantine for 14 days. And then that includes a second COVID test during your quarantine period. And then once all of that's done, you'll be able to go and get a booster shot if you need to, or go and get your vaccine series if you need to, and prep before the start of classes. So it's a little more involved if you don't have one of the Canadian vaccines, but still very doable. We have many students who arrive with an alternative vaccine that are able to still come. So don't get discouraged. It's just a couple extra steps. And the big difference is you do have to quarantine. Now, when we talk about quarantine, it's very important that you understand the rules around quarantine. And I want to be clear, Fanshawe doesn't set these rules. The Canadian government sets these rules. So it's very serious if you get caught breaking quarantine rules. It can be a significant fine, it can be jail time, it can be a lot of things that you don't want to happen. So you have to understand the quarantine rules. So when you're in quarantine, you have to stay in quarantine. So you're staying in one location, separated from anyone who didn't travel with you, and you're not allowed to leave. You can't go to the grocery store. You can't go for a walk. You have to stay in your quarantine location. The only reason you're allowed to leave is emergency medical care. So it has to be something very serious. While you're in quarantine, you can't use shared spaces. So for example, if you're quarantining in a hotel, maybe that hotel has a gym or a pool. You can't use those spaces because then you would be interacting with people who aren't in quarantine. So you have to stay isolated in your room. You're not allowed to use shared spaces. You're also not allowed to have any guests come and visit you. Even if you're going to be maybe in the backyard of a house, that's not okay. You have to stay away from anyone who did not travel with you. So no guests, no visitors during your quarantine period. Once quarantine's over, go for it. Have fun, say hi to all your friends. But during quarantine, you have to stay isolated, keep your conversations online. You need to avoid contact with anyone who didn't travel with you. So if you are having groceries delivered, you want to use the option to have them just dropped off outside your door so that you're not interacting with the delivery person and possibly spreading any germs, right? You have to stay isolated. You want to make sure that you're cleaning, you're disinfecting spaces. And in those few circumstances where you might have to interact with someone, you need to be wearing a mask and staying socially distant. So for example, when you first arrive to your hotel and you're checking in, you're probably going to have to talk to a clerk at the front desk. So wearing a mask, staying socially distant, and going straight to your room. But for the most part, the real key of quarantine is that you're avoiding contact with anyone who didn't travel with you. You're not seeing friends, you're not going to the grocery store, you're staying isolated just in case you are sick. You're not spreading those germs to anyone. Now, quarantine accommodations also have rules. What is okay for a quarantine accommodation? What's allowed? What's not allowed? And I want to start by saying the best quarantine location, in Fanshawe's opinion, is at one of our partner hotels because we know that they're safe, we know that they're clean, and we know that they meet the government quarantine requirements. So you'll be isolated, you won't have a risk of interacting with anyone. We know that they will be approved when you're talking to the border agent with your quarantine plan. We know that they're a solid option. So the partner hotels are the first choice I would recommend over and over again to students. But if you are choosing to quarantine in a private accommodation, you have to make sure that they meet these requirements. So you have to have basic necessities, right? You need to be able to have heat. That's very important in Canada. Internet, water, you need your basic living necessities. You can't be quarantining with anyone who's considered high risk. So for example, if you have a grandparent in Canada that's over 65, or maybe you want to stay with your aunt, but she has an underlying health condition, those would both be considered high risk situations. You can't quarantine with them. You have to be distant and isolated and not around anyone, especially people who are considered high risk. And what's key is that isolation. Remember, during your quarantine, you have to be able to remain isolated, remain separate from anyone who didn't travel with you. So that means you can't go and quarantine in a group living environment. So if you have a friend that's got a house in London and there's 4 other people already living in that house, that's not a good quarantine location because there's no way you're going to be able to stay isolated from all of the other people in that house. Or let's say maybe you have a family member that's got an apartment that they want you to come stay in. Well, even if it's a small apartment, how are you going to stay isolated from that person? They won't work. You have to be able to stay isolated and away from anyone who didn't travel with you. So no group living or arrangements. If the border officer doesn't believe that you can stay isolated, they could reject your quarantine plan, and that's not a situation you want to be in. So you have to make sure that no matter where you're quarantining, you can stay isolated. You've got a private bedroom, a private bathroom, and you're not going to be using shared common spaces. So again, that's why we really recommend our partner hotels, because we know you'll have your own space completely to yourself. With Fanshawe, we've negotiated discounted rates for Fanshawe students at our hotels. So you're not paying full price, you do get a deal. All of our partner hotels are in London, and some of them will offer meal packages. So you can buy like breakfast, lunch, and dinner. All of them also allow delivery services. So if you order groceries online, they can come right up to your hotel room. And we have a range of hotel styles. So some of them are just, traditional. You've got your private room and bathroom, where others are maybe apartment style. So you can have a living room and a kitchenette and have a little more space if you're traveling with family or you want to do more cooking. So there's a range of options, which is really nice. If you're looking for our hotel information, where our partner hotels are, then you need our resources list. So all of the hotel details are included in our resources list, which we'll post in the chat. I'll ask Laura to post that in the chat, or we can share it at the end. But you can also email us and get it anytime. I highly recommend the partner hotels for your quarantine because you have that security in knowing they will be accepted. It's a solid kind of bulletproof quarantine plan to go to a hotel. It's the safest option. Some students might be planning to live in residence in the winter semester. Residence is a great option, but you cannot quarantine in residence. So if you are planning to live in the on-campus residence buildings, you will need to complete your quarantine somewhere else and then move into residence. Residence is an example of a group living situation. So if you were trying to quarantine in residence, there's no way that you could stay isolated from your suite mates who share your residence unit. That's just not possible. So you cannot quarantine in residence. You have to finish your quarantine somewhere else and then move into residence. Now, I talked about our resources list. It outlines all of our partner hotels, but it's also really useful because it includes information on grocery delivery options and different delivery services that are available in London. One big tip I'll have for anyone who's coming to Canada, but particularly for students who need to quarantine, is to make sure that you're arriving with a credit card that will work in Canada. It doesn't have to be a Canadian credit card, but it just has to be a credit card that will work in Canada. Because when you're placing online orders for delivery services during your quarantine period, 90% of the services require a credit card. And if you don't have a credit card, how are you going to get groceries? How are you going to get food? Because you can't go to the bank, you can't go to the grocery store until after quarantine is done. So you do have to think about and plan for how are you going to get the things you need while you're in quarantine. And having a credit card that will work in Canada is key. It's very essential because as we're kind of hands tied while you're in quarantine. I can't come to your quarantine location and bring you Canadian dollars. You have to make sure that you have access to funds, and that would be your credit card. So talk to your bank before you come to Canada. Make sure that your credit card will work in Canada. You can bring Canadian cash, you can bring Canadian dollars, but again, that's going to limit your options. Not all delivery services will accept cash payments. Most of them want a credit card. So if you are traveling with dollars, make sure they're Canadian dollars too, not American, because not everyone will take American dollars in Canada. It's a different currency. And if they do take American dollars, you're going to get Canadian dollars back as change and you'll lose money on the exchange rate. So keep that in mind. the best option is to travel with a credit card that will work in Canada. And if that's not possible, make sure you bring Canadian dollars. So some common questions. If you've been vaccinated, or do I have to be vaccinated, to come to Canada? No, you don't have to be vaccinated to come to Canada, but you do need to plan for quarantine if you're not vaccinated. Anyone who's not vaccinated has to quarantine for 14 days. If you've received a different vaccine or a partial dose, if you don't have one of the vaccines recognized in Canada, again, you can still travel. It just means you're going to have to quarantine and probably get a booster shot once you're here. And if you're not vaccinated or you can't arrive in time, if you can't meet those deadlines that we talked about at the beginning, then talk to your regional recruiter right away. Talk to your regional representative now to start thinking about what your options are. You don't want to leave it to the last minute. These are just the resources again. So we have the isolation resource list. We have a couple different web links. You'll have access to the copy of this presentation at the end. I'll put it into the chat so you can go back and reference these. So we'll talk about section 2, arriving in Canada. What you need to know kind of right before you arrive and what to expect at the airport. So what's really, really important, every student needs to know about this. Before you come to Canada, you must submit your COVID readiness form. This is how you tell Fanshawe that you're coming to Canada. This is my arrival information. This is my vaccine information. This is my quarantine information. It's officially how you notify the college that you're coming to Canada, and it impacts a few things. So it's a very important document, and luckily it's very easy to submit. You can do it all online, but just know everyone needs to submit their COVID readiness form. So you'll be notifying the college of your intent to travel. You'll share all of your arrival details, your flight information. You can request the free arrival services when you submit the form. You'll share your quarantine plan, you'll share your vaccine info, and you'll commit to the quarantine rules. Now, when you submit your COVID readiness form, someone in the international office will review it. So we'll double check for you to make sure that you haven't missed any of the rules, that your plan looks solid, that you've given all the information you need. So it's also a way for us to support you, to help you make sure that you have everything you need before you come to Canada. Now, what's very important is that you submit the COVID readiness form at least 7 days before you come to Canada, because we have someone who manually checks that form. It's not going to be an instant check when you submit. Someone has to go in and pull it. And if you're submitting less than 7 days before you come to Canada, there is a risk that we might not see it in time to be able to check it, or to give you time to make any changes if necessary. So at least 7 days before you come to Canada, please make sure you're submitting that COVID readiness form because it is very, very important. How to submit your COVID readiness form? It's pretty easy. There's a link. You log in with your Fanshawe username and password. You'll put in all of the information. It's very important that you only submit your form when you have your plans finalized. We want to make sure that whatever you put in the form is accurate and complete, because you're committing to whatever you put in your form. You're saying, this is my plan. Sorry, I'm just hearing someone who's off mute. If you could please mute yourself. So whatever you put in the COVID readiness form, you're committing to that. That's what you're saying you're going to do. So you want to make sure that it's accurate and complete. Once your form's submitted, you'll know that it was successfully submitted because you'll get a confirmation email. Then once your form is approved, you get a second confirmation email from me or from one of the colleagues saying, yep, your COVID readiness form is approved. That's great. Students who need to quarantine and who choose to quarantine in private accommodation, you'll be sent the quarantine commitment form. So it's just a form, again, that you sign that says, I'm committing to the quarantine rules. And then at the end, you get your free shuttle confirmation email. So you get all the instructions on how to meet your shuttle, where to meet your shuttle. So it takes a little bit of time. So I'll stress again, you really need to submit your COVID readiness form as early as possible and at least 7 days before you travel. So again, some questions, some common questions. When should I submit the form? At least 7 days before you travel. I'm going to repeat that a few times throughout this presentation. Some students maybe don't want the arrival services. Maybe your uncle is going to pick you up. That's fine, but you still need to submit your COVID readiness form. You still have to tell us that you're coming, give us all those details. Maybe you're waiting for your study permit or you don't quite have your flights booked yet. That's fine. You just need to submit before you come to Canada. It doesn't have to be immediately. So make sure that you've got everything booked, that you've got your study permit, you know what your plan is, and then submit the form. We don't want you to submit multiple forms if possible. We'd like you just to submit the one. So you have the COVID readiness form, but you also have the ArriveCan app. So the COVID readiness form is how you tell Fanshawe what your travel plans are. The ArriveCan app is how you tell the Canadian government. So it's the same information that you're going to put into both forms. You're just telling two different people. You're telling Fanshawe, and then through ArriveCan, you're telling the Canadian government. So all travelers coming to Canada, whether you're Canadian or international, everyone entering the country has to submit their information through the ArriveCan app. It's how the Canadian government is tracking arrivals through the pandemic. So just know that you do need to submit your information through ArriveCan at least 24 hours before you come to Canada. So it's going to be one of the last things you do before you come to Canada, is submitting your information through ArriveCan. Once your information is submitted, you get a confirmation code that you will show to the border agent. So they will be checking it at the airport to make sure that you submitted before arrival. So just keep that in mind as well. To enter Canada, you do need a negative COVID-19 test taken within 72 hours of your flight to Canada. So before you even come to Canada in your home country, you're going to have to organize a COVID test right before you get on the plane, a day or two before, and make sure you have that negative result because the airlines will be asking to see it, and they'll be checking the date to make sure it's within the allotted time frame. So make sure you're planning ahead. In some countries, it's very easy to get a COVID test. You don't need to make an appointment. You just walk in. In other countries, you are going to need to schedule your test in advance. So make sure you know what you have to do in your country to get a COVID test. Documents to bring. So everyone is going to have slightly different documents to enter Canada. And it depends again on your situation. Remember, we talked at the beginning about what your situation is. Are you vaccinated by a Canadian recognized vaccine? Maybe you're vaccinated by a different vaccine, or you don't have any vaccine. All of that's going to impact your documents. But in general, there's two categories. There's documents related to your quarantine, and then there's the regular documents you need to enter Canada. So related to your quarantine, you're going to need a copy of your COVID readiness form. So the form that you submit to Fanshawe, you get a copy of it. And again, it just outlines everything. It shows your arrival information. It shows your vaccine information. It shows your quarantine plan. So that's a really good summary that you can show to the border agent. And it's also how you demonstrate Fanshawe's approval, because the form comes from Fanshawe, it's branded Fanshawe, and it's how you can show the border agent, yep, Fanshawe has approved my travel. They know I'm coming. You're also going to need that ArriveCan submission code. So you put all your information into the app, and then you get the submission code. You'll need the negative COVID test result. So again, what you use to get on the plane to show the airline you've had a negative test, you'll have that as proof when you enter Canada as well. And then you need the documents to show your quarantine plan. So if you've said, I'm going to quarantine at the Best Western Hotel in London, you want to bring your reservation confirmation. So the confirmation code that shows your reservation dates at that hotel. Or if you've said, I'm going to get groceries by ordering through this delivery service, show the plan, show any documents that back up what you've said in your COVID readiness form that show, yep, I'm going to quarantine here. This is my proof. This is my hotel reservation. You can bring your shuttle confirmation email that Fanshawe will send you that shows, yep, the college has organized a car to pick me up at the airport at this time, and they're going to bring me directly to my quarantine location. So any of those documents that relate to your quarantine plan that you can show the border officer that says, I've made this plan, I've committed to this plan, I've taken all of the necessary steps, that's what you want to bring. The second category of documents are the documents you would need to enter Canada, even if the pandemic wasn't happening. So that's things like your letter of admission, your offer letter, your passport, your visa, your study permit approval. You'll need your proof of funds, so like your banking information, and any other documents that you submitted when you applied for your study permit. So if your spouse is traveling with you, all of their documents, those kind of traditional documents that you need to enter Canada. And if you're not sure, if you want more clarification on what's required, you can speak to your agent, or you can also email the international office and we can give you more details. COVID testing at the airport. So if you are not considered fully vaccinated, so if you have one of the vaccines that is not recognized in Canada, you will do a COVID test at the airport in Toronto. Fully vaccinated students don't have to do this test, but if you're not fully vaccinated, you'll get a test at the Toronto airport. And when you get your test done at the airport, they'll also give you a take-home kit so that you can give yourself a second test during your quarantine period. And that all happens at the airport. You'll be directed there once the border officer confirms if you're vaccinated or non-vaccinated. As I've said, Fanshawe offers free arrival services to students. So we will organize a shuttle to pick you up at the Toronto airport and bring you to your quarantine location in London. Even fully vaccinated students, if you want the free ride, we're happy to give it to you as long as you're coming to London or one of our regional campuses. If you're fully vaccinated and you're going to go stay with an aunt in Windsor or Sarnia or wherever, that's fine, but our shuttle service doesn't go there. But for non-vaccinated and anyone who's coming to London, the shuttle will pick you up at the airport and bring you to your quarantine location. Depending on whether you're traveling alone and what time of day you arrive, we have different services, but just know 24/7, someone will be there. So it doesn't really matter what time you're arriving in Canada, we'll be able to provide that shuttle service, and we're happy to do that. So a quick summary of entering Canada. So again, everyone has to have either a quarantine plan or backup quarantine plan, and you need to submit it to Fanshawe before you travel. So that's your COVID readiness form, must be submitted at least 7 days before you travel to Canada. You need to submit that same information through the ArriveCan app so that the Canadian government has it at least 24 hours before you come to Canada. You will need to present a negative COVID test taken within 72 hours of your arrival to make sure that you can get on the plane and you can come. You'll get a COVID test at the airport if you're not vaccinated. And then you'll get the free shuttle service, and you'll need to maintain social distancing, wear a mask, do all of those precautions when you're on your way to your quarantine location. And the final section, which is also the shortest section, and then we'll go into some questions. So what to expect after you arrive in Canada? You've gone through immigration, you've left the airport, you're in your accommodation. What now? If you are quarantining, you will be getting checks during your quarantine. So students who have to quarantine, you might receive a phone call from the Canadian government. There are quarantine officers that will be checking in on all travelers, not just students. And it's really important to understand you're not in trouble. If you get this phone call, you are not in trouble. They're just doing a random check. So I would be intimidated if the government called me. So I understand that kind of initial intimidation. But as long as you answer the phone and say, yeah, it's me, it's Caitlin. Yes, I'm in quarantine. I arrived yesterday. Nope, I haven't left. I'm following the rules. That's it. It'll be a very simple conversation, probably just a few minutes, and then it's all good. You're fine. The trouble comes if you don't answer the phone, because then they wonder, well, she's supposed to be in quarantine. She's not allowed to leave. Where is she? Why isn't she answering? And that creates more questions. So it's a little intimidating, I understand, but you're not in trouble. It's just a random check. So just make sure that you answer the phone. Similarly, sometimes an immigration officer actually comes to your front door and they knock on the door. And again, it's just a random check. Some students get them, some don't. You are not in trouble. All you need to do is put on a mask, answer the door, say, yeah, it's me, it's Caitlin. I'm here, I'm in quarantine, I'm following the rules, and then they leave. So can definitely be intimidating. I totally understand that. But as long as you answer, you're okay. It's just a random check. They're not going to come inside. They're not going to demand to see documents. They just want to see that you are where you said you would be. And maybe you don't even get any of the checks. It's very random. So some students will get one, some students won't. You'll also be getting a daily check-in from Fanshawe, and that's not random. So every Fanshawe student who comes and has to quarantine will get a daily check-in form emailed to them. So it's a very simple form. You fill it out every day that just says, yep, I'm still in quarantine. I'm following the rules. And you'll also get phone calls from Fanshawe. So we have senior students who have been in Canada for 1 or 2 semesters that call students during their quarantine. And that's really more of just a check-in to see, how's it going? How are you doing? It's a really nice opportunity for you to speak to another student at Fanshawe, and you can ask them anything you want, really. It doesn't have to be related to quarantine. You can ask them about the library, you can ask them about the city. So they'll call you once or twice during your quarantine period as well, but it's really just a friendly checkup. If you don't want to talk to them, you don't have to talk to them. Again, if you are quarantining, you will have to do a second COVID test on day 8 of your quarantine. So at the airport, you'll be given a take-home test kit, which is this picture here. And just know that on day 8, you will have to complete that test. All of the instructions are included in the kit. It's a pretty simple process, but it's just something you have to keep in mind if you're quarantining. Now, we've talked about vaccination. And it's just important to know before you come to Canada, you will have to submit your proof of vaccination to the college. So once you arrive in Canada, once you get settled, just know that you'll have to submit your vaccine documents as proof that you're complying with the college vaccine policy. If you received your vaccine outside of Canada, which I think everyone on this call will have received their vaccine outside of Canada, it just means you'll also have to get that approved by the local health unit. So they'll look at whatever vaccine documents you have and they will assess, yeah, you meet the requirements, or you know what, maybe you need a booster shot here in Canada. The good news is that booster is free. It's very easy to get. You just have to make sure that you're planning, you're giving yourself enough time to get the booster and then have 14 days before classes start. Because by the start of classes, you need to be considered fully vaccinated in Canada. Fanshawe's vaccine policy requires anyone coming to campus to be fully vaccinated. So that's why you might have to get that booster and give yourself 2 weeks before classes start. So during your quarantine period, or if you're not quarantining when you first arrive, you can do a little more research on this. We will be emailing students more information, but just know that you'll have to go probably to the vaccine center here in London, bring all of your documents, get them reviewed by a health official, and then maybe get a booster shot in that same appointment. It's all walk-in, it's free, it's very easy to do. During your quarantine or when you first arrive in Canada, there will also be a lot of just social stuff you can do. So even if you're in quarantine, there's a lot of virtual activities happening. So physically you're isolated, but virtually you can still connect with the college and with other students, and just keep an eye on your email for information on the events that are happening. And that is the end of the presentation. So it is a lot of information, I know, but hopefully it's useful information. And we have about 20 minutes left. So I will take some general questions now that I've seen in the chat. Please keep yourselves on mute still. I'm just going to read questions from the chat and go through those. And I'll actually ask if Laura is on the call. Hi.
Good morning.
Any questions you want to start with?
Yeah, for sure. So sort of one of the common questions that I'm seeing is questions about arriving for students who have already received a booster. So if you can explain to students the difference between entering Canada and how Health Canada reviews vaccinations versus the London Middlesex Health Unit. I think that would help clarify some questions.
So there's kind of 2 phases. The first thing you have to get through is entering Canada, and that's very black and white. You either are fully vaccinated or you're not. So you either have one of the 4 vaccines that's recognized in Canada. So that's this first column here: Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, which in some countries is called Covishield, or the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So if you have one of those vaccines, you have the full series, and you got it at least 14 days before you come to Canada, then you're considered fully vaccinated. When you come to Canada, it's really simple, no quarantine, you're fully vaccinated, come on in. But if you have something else, anything other than those 4 vaccines, you won't be considered fully vaccinated. Maybe you have the full series of the Sinovac vaccine, that's great, but you're not considered fully vaccinated. Maybe you have the Sinovac vaccine and 1 shot of Moderna, that's great, but you're still not considered fully vaccinated. So it's very strict and it's very clear. You either have one of the 4 or you don't. So you will have to quarantine for 2 weeks if you don't. Now, once your quarantine is over and you're trying to assess whether you meet the vaccine requirements in Fanshawe's vaccination policy and in the Ontario, so our provincial government, not the full country, but just the province of Ontario, that's when you need to go to the health unit and do the assessment. So a doctor, someone who's actually medically trained, a doctor or a nurse, will look at all the vaccine documents you have, and they'll say, yeah, you know, you've got the Sinovac vaccine, but you've already got one shot of Moderna. So you've already got a booster. Maybe they'll say, that's fine, you don't need anything else. Or they'll look at it and they'll say, you know what, you do need a booster for whatever reason. And then they'll give you that booster shot. So Fanshawe can't, like, I'm not a doctor and I don't pretend to be. So Fanshawe can't tell you you're definitely going to need a booster or you won't need a booster. All we can say is if you don't have one of the 4 vaccines recognized in Canada, you'll have to quarantine. And after quarantine, you need to go to the health unit and they will assess whether you need a booster or not to be considered fully vaccinated as you are like going to stores and walking around campus and things like that here in Ontario. So it is very situational and it will vary student to student. Not everyone has the same, but chances are if you don't have one of the 4, you might need a vaccine or a vaccine booster, sorry. Does that make sense, Laura? That help?
Absolutely. So there is a question, since you have this slide pulled up right now, I wondered if you could just explain one more time the significance of the arrival dates and why they're important.
So this arrival deadline, which is this column here, this row here, I should say, it varies. Your arrival deadline varies depending on your vaccination situation. And that's again, because some students might need a booster shot, some students might need to get their full vaccine, other students won't need anything. And the end goal is that everyone is considered fully vaccinated in Ontario before the start of classes, because Fanshawe's vaccine policy requires everyone coming to campus, which for students, you're all coming to campus. So everyone coming to campus has to be fully vaccinated before you come. So before the start of classes, all students need to be considered fully vaccinated here in London. So that means if you don't have any vaccine before you arrive in Canada, or maybe you have a vaccine, but it's not recognized in Canada, you need to arrive with enough time to either get your vaccine here or get a booster shot if necessary. And that has to happen at least 2 weeks before the start of classes because it takes 2 weeks for a vaccine to be considered effective. So you can't just like get the shot on Monday and go to class on Tuesday. You have to get the shot, wait 2 weeks, and then go to campus. So you have to give yourself that buffer time. Now, for students who have one of the 4 vaccines recognized in Canada, we know that you don't need to do anything more. You have a vaccine that's recognized in Canada, you'll be considered fully vaccinated. We know that you don't have to quarantine. We know that you won't need a booster shot. So you can come 2 days before the start of classes and you're fine because you have what you need. It's totally fine. You won't need anything else. You have the most flexibility. But students who have a different vaccine that's maybe not recognized in Canada, you have this deadline of December 5th because we know that you're going to have to do a 2-week quarantine. So you'll arrive in Canada, quarantine for 14 days, and then you need to go and get your vaccine documents assessed at the health unit to see if you need a booster shot. And if you do need a booster shot, you have to get that shot before 2 weeks before the start of classes, because it needs to take effect before classes start. So that's really cutting down on the time you have. Oops. And then if you don't have any vaccine, you have to arrive even earlier because not only do you have to get 1 shot, you're gonna have to get 2 shots in Canada. And you can't just go and get both shots at the same appointment. I'm sure everyone knows you have to give yourself time between the shots for them to take effect. And then again, before the start of classes and the second shot, you have to have that 14 days. So that's why those deadlines, those arrival deadlines are different depending on what your vaccination status is. Because it depends on what you're going to have to do once you arrive in Canada, if you're going to need anything else.
What would be your advice for people who are unable to arrive by those dates? What should they do?
So if you don't think you can arrive by this date, and you're a brand new student, you're starting your studies in winter 2022, you're not currently studying in the fall semester, but you're going to start in winter, what you need to do is reach out to your regional representative immediately. Go talk to them right now. You want as much time as possible to make a plan, because if you leave it to the last minute, it's not going to go well. So if you're a brand new student starting in winter, talk to your regional rep right now. Go talk to Bruno in Brazil, talk to the India office, talk to whoever your rep is. And if you don't know who they are, your agent can help you, or you can reach out to the international office and we can help connect you. If you're a current student, so maybe you're studying right now in the fall semester, you've already been studying for a semester or two, reach out to the international office immediately. Again, don't leave it to the last minute. Talk to us now, reach out to us now and say, I don't think I can come by my deadline. What should I do? And then we can talk to you about your options and figure out why you don't think you can come. But you do need to come by the deadline. It's very important that you come by the deadline, and it's going to be very difficult to get late arrival approval. So don't buy a ticket after your deadline, because you might not be approved. So it's, I guess the summary of that answer is talk to us now, don't leave it, and don't buy a ticket until you have approval.
Yeah, 100%. And the same goes, I'm seeing a lot of people in the chat that are talking about potentially not having their visas in time. So again, that is something just kind of in conjunction with your vaccination details that you need to make sure that you'll also have proper documentation to arrive in Canada on time as well. So if you feel that that's not going to be something that will be possible, the sooner you reach out to your regional representative or to your agent, the more information that you'll have to help you plan your arrival, whether that be coming a different term or working out your options. That's always a good idea. So there were some questions about some resources. So I'm just going to pop those in now. If I could just get everyone to just refrain from chatting, just so everyone has an opportunity to pull these documents off. So the first thing I'm adding here is already lost it, the COVID-19 readiness form. So that'll be very important for everyone. The other thing I'll include is our partner hotels. So that's added there. And the other thing I'm going to add is also the hotel promo codes. So there were some questions about our previous 2-day accommodation that we used to provide to students. Unfortunately, since everybody is kind of in different situations with their hotel stay and their quarantine requirements, instead, we have opted to provide you guys with a series of promo codes that you can use to get preferred rates if you choose to book a hotel stay when you arrive in London. And I also see that Caitlin has added the arrival presentation, so that'll be a good resource for you. And for everyone, we will be posting this presentation on our YouTube page, so you can always refer back and go over some of this information, because it is a lot of information for sure. Okay, so we can pop back into the chat here. Another thing that I'm seeing is questions about Canadian phone number and recommendations around that. What would you suggest, Caitlin?
So you don't have to have a Canadian phone number before you arrive in Canada. You can, on the COVID readiness form, for example, you can put your WhatsApp number or your WeChat number if that's what you use. And we're happy to contact you through WhatsApp or WeChat. There are some services that you can order in advance, but some students, I would say most students, prefer to organize their phone number once they get to Canada. For ArriveCan, if you're quarantining and you need to put a phone number down, again, that's kind of a point to quarantine at the hotel, because you can put the hotel phone number down. But you want to make sure that whatever number you're putting in the COVID readiness form and ArriveCan, it's a number where people can actually contact you. Don't give us your cousin's phone number. Don't give us your friend's phone number if they're not with you, because that doesn't do anyone any good. We're trying to contact you. We need to be able to speak to you. So you can put down your WhatsApp. That's totally fine. I also saw a question, do I have to quarantine while I wait for the booster to take effect? No, you don't. You only quarantine when you first arrive for the 14 days after arrival. After that, you won't need to quarantine.
I've had a few questions about program delivery for the winter term, and if it's required that students be on campus this winter.
That's a great question. And yes, I believe all programs are blended for the winter term. So that means at least one or two of your classes, if not more, are going to be taught in person on campus. You will be in the classroom with your classmates and your teachers. There is not the option to do classes online for most programs. So you do have to be not only in Canada, but you need to be living in London. It's not realistic to think, oh, I'm going to live in Brampton or Toronto or Kitchener and just come to London for class. That's an hour and a half, 2-hour drive. And in the winter with snow and on the highways, it can be even longer. So really, you do need to be living in London and coming to class on campus. You'll receive emails from the college with more information specific to your program. And after you submit your COVID readiness form, you'll be able to access your class schedule. So you'll actually see exactly which classes are online and which ones are in person. You do need to submit your COVID readiness form to get your class schedule. They won't release it until your form is submitted. But again, don't just, half fill out the form and submit it so you can see your schedule. Make sure whatever you put in that COVID readiness form is accurate and is final, because you're committing to whatever you put in that form.
I have about, oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say we've got about 2 minutes left. We can probably sneak in 1 or 2 more questions.
Yeah, so I've had a few questions from people who are bringing their families with them. Can you explain what Fanshawe Cares provides for families who are arriving in Canada?
Yeah, that's great. So a lot of students do travel maybe with a spouse or with their children. That's great. As long as they've got the immigration paperwork, bring them. That's wonderful. Fanshawe students who are bringing family members with them, the family members can also join you in the arrival services. So for example, if you submit your COVID readiness form and tell us that you're arriving with your spouse and with 2 kids, then we're happy to organize the transportation for them as well. So they can share in that free shuttle from the Toronto airport to your quarantine accommodation. We're happy to offer that support through that. We just need to know, I guess, in advance. So just tell us if you've got family coming with you, and we're happy to give them those same arrival services. They can share your quarantine space. It's really nice in that sense. You don't have to separate, but you just need to make sure that you're including them in the COVID readiness form. And there is a section that asks, are you traveling with family members? And are you traveling with pets? A lot of students are arriving with a cat or a dog. And again, that's great, but we just need to know on your COVID readiness form so we can make sure to book you appropriate transportation that will accept the pet as well.
Hello.
Yeah, so we have Pujash here. Would you like to share your question?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I'm having, first of all, good morning, ma'am.
Sorry, I'm gonna cut you off, Laura. Can you understand?
Yeah, sorry, it looks like you have a bad connection, which is okay. We'll just share that anybody who does have questions, you're welcome to, sorry, Pujash, I'm just going to mute you here. Students with questions, you can always email the Fanshawe Cares team. So again, I'll just ask for you to put a quick pause on the chat here so people have time to take down this information. So Fanshawe Cares at fanshawec.ca is our general inbox. So if we didn't get to your questions today, you're always welcome to send us an email. And we'll be running these sessions every Wednesday. So in the weeks leading up to your departure, it's always a good idea to come because people ask great questions every week and you might hear something you didn't hear this week. So, yeah.
Can I ask you a question, please?
So sorry, we're just out of time. So I'm actually going to have to say no to your question right now, but please send us an email or join us again next week. Also, as a reminder to everyone,
I send you
post the recording. Sorry, I'm so sorry. I can't take a voice question right now because we're going to end in 30 seconds, but we are going to post this recording onto the YouTube channel, Fanshawe International YouTube page. So you're welcome to go and watch it again. Or as Laura said, join us again next week. If you are emailing us questions, please be just a tiny bit patient with us. It might take us 1 or 2 days to respond, but we will respond. And with that, I'm going to say thank you very much to Laura for helping today. It was great to have you with us. And thank you everyone for joining us. I hope that you learned something and that this was a useful presentation. And we look forward to either seeing you again in the future or seeing you on campus in the new year. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
great day.
Bye.
Night for
Thank you.
everywhere.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.